Hello, and welcome to another edition of Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast. I am your humble host and correspondent. My name is Jon Steinberg, sitting alongside my lovely and talented producer slash fiance, Lisa Lowe. And on today's edition of the program, we are bringing you a special, close to the heart topic, something that my fiance and I are both heavily invested in, and that is urban exploration. So today we are going to provide you with a list of the 10 most fascinating, off the beaten path sites in Southern California that you can explore. It's important to note here that, well, first of all, a quick definition of urban exploration. Think of it as a tour through contemporary modern ruins. So in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius exploded in Italy and rained volcanic ash over a number of cities, the most famous of them being, of course, Pompeii. Cut to the year of our Lord 2006, and I'm in Italy at the site of the ruins, wondering what do we have in the United States that could possibly compare to this European cauldron of melancholy. Now, it being thousands of years since the event, human beings are heavily divorced from the reality of what actually took place at Pompeii when Mount Vesuvius exploded. You tour the grounds, being told about the history of the brothels that some of the Romans used to frequent and shops that carpenters used to ply their trade at. But while you're taking photographs and selfies among the ruins at places such as this, the Colossus of Rhodes in Greece, the Temple of Artemis in modern-day Turkey, you forget that it was actual people who once lived, flourished, and utilized these spaces before they became ruins. Urban explorers look at modern variations on the Pompeii, Temple of Artemis, Colossus of Rhodes formula. It could be abandoned buildings, hospitals that are no longer in service, campsites that no longer host campers, any number of places that used to exist where commerce was conducted and fun was had. Essentially, places that still exist but shouldn't. So, we turn our attention to Southern California's Rolodex of urban exploration sites that are severely off the beaten path. And I should note that before traveling to any of the destinations that we're going to discuss on today's episode, please do your research, make sure that you've packed the right set of supplies, tools, make sure you're being safe and abiding by any and all state, city, county, neighborhood rules. Okay, now, that being said, let's begin. At number 10, the site in question is about 45 miles northeast of Los Angeles, and it is the home, or former home, of the Llano del Rio Commune. I went there this weekend, actually, and it's at this site where roughly 1,400 individuals in the year 1914 decided to start their own utopia. They didn't want to live within the bounds of the cities. They didn't want to be governed by large state apparatuses. They were interested in their own thing. And it was in 1914 that Job Harriman came up with the concept of a modern-day utopia in the Mojave Desert. And today, 100 plus years later, there are still remnants of the group's history that you can still check out. For Llano del Rio was not long for this world. The dream, the commune, only existed for 5 years. And after that, the 1,400 individuals who had signed up decided to call it quits and try their hand in Louisiana. And that didn't work either. But it really didn't work in Southern California. The desert, as it turned out, if you didn't organize things on a big industrial scale, was not hospitable to a group of individuals accustomed to modern, for the time, comforts. The food wasn't great, the rules were harsh, and the bathroom situation left something to be desired. And yet, even today, as I mentioned, you can still check out some artifacts that are still on the site 50 miles away from Los Angeles from over 100 years ago. There's a large kind of fireplace that undoubtedly the commune members must have gathered around to eat their less than awesome meals. And foundations exist where you can see buildings used to sit. I'll add that maybe 5 minutes away sits a house in Pier Blossom where Brave New World scribe Aldous Huxley resided for a couple years with his wife and son. Interesting to note, this was after he'd written Brave New World, but it is fascinating to note that Aldous Huxley had a view of a failed society from his bedroom window. The guy that wrote about what I think can best be described as a failed futuristic society in Brave New World. So, Llano del Rio, 45 miles to 50 miles north of Los Angeles to check out a failed commune. And number 9, Bighorn Mine. This is in the San Gabriel Mountains within the Angeles National Forest, the creation of Charles Vincent. So there are as you might imagine, great deal of abandoned mines within the bounds of Southern California with the gold rush and all. And this is one of the more impressive examples of an abandoned mine. So the aforementioned Charles Vincent got started after the Civil War in the 1880s. And by about 1920, this mining operation was basically done in. It had ended. And because of the location of the mine, that's code for it's extremely remote and hard to visit. 100 years later, the mine and the infrastructure by which it was explored still sits in ruins in Wrightwood, California. There's a great hike. A couple of these that we're going to discuss involve hiking, and you might imagine that part of the reason they're still in existence is the simple fact that it would be difficult. It would probably cost a lot of money, time, and effort to extricate all of these materials and boards and nails and all of this stuff from this remote mountain site. But if you're adventurous, like we are here at Living in the Sprawl, you can do a 4-mile round trip hike where you walk by a really creepy abandoned mine. You can stick your head in. I don't advise venturing much further beyond that. And then if you continue, you will find yourself at the epicenter of Charles Vincent's abandoned mining operation. The building is, in ruins, but the foundation is very much still in existence, and you can explore it for yourself. And there is a magnificent view from atop the abandoned Bighorn mining trail. You can look out over the entire swath of San Gabriel Mountains. It's breathtaking. Maybe enough to allow you to momentarily forget that you are kind of on the edge of a cliff. And if you were to look down, it would be sort of scary. And Charles Vincent had a colorful history of his own. And I can't tell how much of this is apocryphal or how much of it is actual fact. But the legend is that Vincent, after serving in the Civil War, had murdered 3 people in Arizona, and in an effort to hide out from authorities, decided to live near his mining operation. This can neither be confirmed nor denied, so we will simply list it as legend. But number 9, if you're interested in exploring a genuine abandoned mine, it's right there at Bighorn Trail in Wrightwood, California. At number 8, Murphy Ranch in the Rustic Canyon area, roughly between Santa Monica and the Pacific Palisades, west side, northwest side of Los Angeles. Pretty infamous spot and another hiking destination. When I journeyed up to the ruins of Murphy Ranch, it was pretty clear that this is a rather popular hiking destination. So if you haven't heard of Murphy Ranch, I'll start by telling you that I cannot believe it ever existed and that any trace of it is still a place that you can visit in person in the world. It's kind of outrageous. This is a spot that was set up in the 1920s and early 1930s by a group of fervent fascists who aligned themselves with the Silver Legion of America. The Silver Legion of America being kind of modeled after the brown shirts in Germany and Mussolini's disciples in Italy. And this was formerly a 50-acre property owned by screen star Will Rogers that was acquired by a fascist sympathizing set of residents who envisioned Hitler's rule being led from the deep recesses of the Rustic Canyon. Today, it's a couple-mile hike, but there's still the water tank from the 1930s and a number of other structures that were set up to serve as the headquarters of a fascist community in the United States. Interesting to mention here that building of this compound and cultivation of everything in its midst was allowed to go on up until December 7th, 1941, when the United States was attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. Literally 2 days after the attack at Pearl Harbor, authorities found themselves at Murphy Ranch arresting individuals and condemning a fascist sympathizing property. It's one of the strangest locations that I've ever been to, taking photographs near the water tank and other buildings on the site shouldn't be possible. Just like, if you really think about it, shouldn't really be part of an Italian tour itinerary to check out a city that was decimated by a volcanic explosion. 1,500 people died at Pompeii, and that's just what we know about. That's the amount of bodies, essentially, that were discovered there. Estimates run the gamut from 10 to 20,000 people, but a lot of people died there. And yet, in normal times, families, extended families, traveling groups, they take all the pictures their heart's desire of these ruins. And such is the case also at Rustic Canyon's Murphy Ranch. the Nazi compound that you might have heard about that still exists in ruins, but nevertheless, just knowing that this was constructed in the first place is kind of crazy enough to reward anyone willing to hike out to see it. There is an enormous staircase, roughly 300 stairs that you can climb, or you can go around the stairs and explore the area through a different trail. And this was a major location in the 2020 Showtime original series Penny Dreadful, City of Angels, where a plot line revolves around Nazis in the United States and Los Angeles at the Murphy Ranch. So have fun. Number 7, the ruins of the SS Dominator off the coast of Rancho Palos Verdes. So this ship set sail in 1961, and while searching for the Port of Los Angeles, found itself in a heap of cascading fog. Anybody who's been to the South Bay at a certain point knows the fog can be quite punishing at certain hours of the day. And this was absolutely the case in 1961 when the SS Dominator, unable to secure a spot to port in San Pedro, found itself wrecked near the cliffs of Palos Verdes. This is another popular spot for urban explorers. There's one trail that you can take to get there, but most people access the abandoned ship by kayak, actually. Not something that I did, but an option nevertheless. The Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, all oceans in general have played host to shipwrecks, from the infamous Titanic to the SS Dominator. And most of the time, remnants of these shipwrecks are taken out of the ocean, but not in this case, leaving a 60-year-old abandoned ship right there underneath the balconies and exteriors of multi-million-dollar properties. We'll be discussing the Queen Mary in a future episode, probably one that deals with haunted locations. And I don't believe that the SS Dominator has a great deal of haunted history, but if you think about an abandoned ship right underneath some of the most expensive real estate in the entire city, well, you'll be able to appreciate the pastime of urban exploration. The SS Dominator off the coast of Palos Verdes. At number 6, a bit of a different kind of site, the Hawthorne Plaza Mall. Big surprise in Hawthorne, California. So this is probably the most notorious example within the bounds of our purview, but the phenomenon of dead malls across the country and across the globe shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. I know where I went to college in Tucson, Arizona, the Elcon Mall is also a fantastic example of the dead mall phenomenon. But we're going to focus on what's going on in Hawthorne in the South Bay for the purposes of this episode. So the mall was constructed, founded, established in the 1970s with big box department stores like Broadway. And in the ensuing decades, it found itself growing further and further out of favor with local residents as other malls were established, for example, the South Bay Galleria and the Del Amo Fashion Square in nearby Torrance. Wow, Torrance keeps popping up on this podcast. I never would have predicted that. In any event, in the 1990s, things really got dire for the Hawthorne Plaza Mall. And by the early 2000s, there were almost no successful businesses operating in the mall proper. It is heavily protected now, and there are a number of deterrents in place to prevent people from trying to explore this abandoned mall. But if you are really industrious, you'll be able to figure it out. And the mall has found itself in a number of recent forms of entertainment. Actually, the 2020 Christopher Nolan epic Tenet had scenes that were filmed there. The abandoned mall sequence in Gone Girl from 2014, that was shot there. There's a Taylor Swift music video, a Chris Brown music video, a David Guetta music video, and yet no commerce whatsoever. There have been a variety of suggestions as to what to do with the property. It is kind of an eyesore, kind of a blight on an area that plays host to SpaceX. That's right. Elon Musk's SpaceX is roughly a mile away from the abandoned Hawthorne Plaza Mall. And within that same mile-long stretch, just a few roads over, is the childhood home of the Wilson family, the Beach Boys. And there's a plaque commemorating the time that the Wilson family spent in Hawthorne. So think about that for a second. Within a mile and a half in the sleepy South Bay community of Hawthorne, California, you have SpaceX, the childhood home of the Beach Boys, and the completely abandoned Hawthorne Plaza Mall. That is America. That is Southern California. And that is why we do what we do here at Living in the Sprawl. No better place to explore. Oh, and if you're interested, the coffee shop scenes in Pulp Fiction with Tim Roth, Amanda Plummer, Sam Jackson, and John Travolta, that was filmed at a coffee shop that is also within that same mile stretch, but that is now an AutoZone. In any event, if you find yourself in the South Bay, there's a lot of good stuff for you to check out, starting with the abandoned Hawthorne Plaza Mall. At number 5, Casa de Amigos, formerly known as the Los Angeles County Poor Farm. So I'll start with an anecdote. When my traveling companion and I had opportunity to visit the site, we discovered a boot. And when you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll understand the strange presence of a boot in a location like the abandoned LA County Poor Farm was quite unnerving to my traveling companion. She exclaimed in terror, "Why is there a boot? Why is there a boot there? Who could that belong to?" And I just shrugged and said, "I don't know. It shouldn't belong to anyone." And yet there it was. So, Casa de Amigos was established in Downey, California in the 1880s as a location for the greater Los Angeles area to house their homeless, indigent, and incapacitated residents. It seems like an idea that might have been dreamt up by Job Harriman, who we talked about a little bit earlier, in his vision for the Llano del Rio Commune. The same type of thinking, I believe, was in play when this whole situation was dreamt up. So the property was meant to be a place where people that had no alternative could head so they didn't have to live on the streets. Interesting if you know anything about contemporary Los Angeles. And where families could place afflicted members without feeling too terrible about it. Now, this was a terrible idea at the time, and fascinatingly, many of the buildings that were constructed between 1880 and 1950 on the site of Casa de Amigos still exist. I know that the city of Downey has a legitimately excellent hospital that is situated on the northern side of the property, roughly 2 miles from all the abandoned buildings that formerly housed indigent members of the greater Los Angeles community. And that hospital has no real relationship to the abandoned areas of Casa de Amigos. And yet, as my traveling companion asked on a visit to the area, why is this here? I had no answer for that. The southern portion of the property is fantastically creepy, and I'm aware of a few failed plans to do some other things with the property, but alas, abandoned ruins of a former hospital for the indigent still exist, and you can see them for yourself in the great city of Downey, California. Number 4, the Old Griffith Zoo. This, of course, being named after infamous Los Angeles pioneer, ? We'll do something covering the life of Griffith J. Griffiths on a forthcoming episode. But the namesake of the largest park in Los Angeles is also the namesake of the abandoned old LA Zoo. Now, this site is not creepy. It's actually pretty fun and a place that an entire family can go, and I don't think that children would really need any prompting to behave or not touch certain things or anything like that. It's within the bounds of the Griffith Park area, and it's a pretty good spot for a picnic or hike. But there are obvious areas where animals once lived inside of cages, inside the zoo, and I'm not entirely sure why the city hasn't done anything to transform this portion of the otherwise picturesque park. It is the Southern California equivalent of Central Park or like Stanley Park in Vancouver, and yet there's a part of this park where cages exist and you can explore them, contemplating what a zoo might have looked like up until 1968. It was actually here that the scenes for Anchorman, the climax in Anchorman, were shot. Some of the scenes involving the Rat King from Under the Silver Lake were filmed here. And if you venture to the area, you'll see why it's enthralled filmmakers over time. Again, as stated at the beginning of the episode, these are properties that shouldn't exist, but still do. And that's why we appreciate them, why we salute them, and why we tell you you should check them out. Rather than standing in an extremely long line to see the Alamo without even understanding why you're there to visit the site in the first place, maybe think about exploring a site like the abandoned Griffith Park Zoo. Different kind of history. History, nevertheless. A vibe, an aura, and a tremendous spot to eat a pastrami sandwich. Number 3, Devil's Gate Dam in that area underneath the 210 freeway between Pasadena and La Cañada Flint Ridge. So once there was a dam and water flowed within the dam freely, and 100 years later, nothing flows in the area except for some very odd vibes. This is an abandoned dam that got its name because there is a rock formation hovering just above the entrance to a mine that resembles the quintessential face of Satan. And if you dare, you have the ability to hike down through the abandoned dam to see it for yourself. Now, whether or not the rock formation resembles Lucifer is, I suppose, in the eye of the beholder, but it is sort of unsettling. And if you look at pictures, we'll post pictures on our website for you to check out that do a nifty job of showing you the strange, curious location of the rock formation sitting directly over the entrance to a mine, as though you were about to enter into a certain kind of portal. Even though there's probably nothing going on in this area, there's something about it that was sort of scary, I'll be candid. And when you pair the image of the Satanic Rock Formation with the abandoned swing sets and equipment that sit not that far away, that I guess were there for the amusement of the people that had to man the dam, yeah, it's all the more odd. But if you do it in the daytime, this is a rewarding hike and one that you will not forget. And if you think about L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, the man behind the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who will also be the subject of an episode in the forthcoming series that we'll do. If you envision those gentlemen trying to invoke some satanic spirits, perform some mystical, awful spells in the area, should kind of put you at ease. Because L. Ron Hubbard, if you know anything about him, kind of made it all up as he went along and was not a figure to be taken all that seriously. So if you don't get freaked out easily, Devil's Gate Dam underneath the 210 freeway. Number 2, Sunken City in San Pedro, California. We discussed Sunken City a little bit in our first episode when we were talking about the 10 best Los Angeles neighborhoods to explore, but I'll address the area a bit in this episode as well. So Sunken City exists off the cliffs of San Pedro, where a number of properties used to inhabit the area with outstanding views of the Pacific Ocean. In 1929, there was a rock slide, and a bunch of these houses fell into the ocean. And there's now a fence that's been established in an attempt to deter people from exploring the abandoned foundations of structures that still line the cliffs in the Sunken City. This is a dangerous area. In 2007, USC field goal kicker Mario Dinello was killed after falling off the cliffs at the Sunken City. He was the kicker on the USC team that went to the Rose Bowl in 2006 and 2007. Pete Carroll actually spoke at his funeral, and a lot of his teammates attended the funeral. And he's not the only person that has fallen to their death at Sunken City. It's happened a bunch of times. It's an area where you seriously have to be careful. But if you go during the daytime with responsible individuals, you should be okay. And it was here where the dude and Walter Sobchak scattered their pal Donnie's ashes at the end of the Big Lebowski in tribute to his passion for exploring Southern California's various beaches. There's nothing quite like Sunken City. For those of you that have heard the rumors about California falling into the ocean at some juncture, this is an example of a time when it actually happened. It's near the beautiful Point Furman Lighthouse, and as was mentioned earlier, the views from the area are utterly breathtaking. And if you want to see what it might look like when California does fall into the ocean, check it out for yourselves at San Pedro's Sunken City. At number 1, maybe it's because I just referenced the Rose Bowl, but I feel compelled to say the granddaddy of them all, Salton Sea. Now, this is a property not for the faint of heart. It definitely will remind you of the landscape from Mad Max Fury Road. The Salton Sea is technically in Imperial County, outside of the Riverside area, outside of Palm Springs, and it is widely regarded as the greatest environmental catastrophe in California's history. It's a man-made sea, in quotation marks, that was originally comprised of water diverted from the Colorado River, but the water in question was exceedingly salty. The salinity of the water, which for some reason the founders of the Salton Sea did not anticipate, would ultimately lead to the inhabitability of the area for fish, for wildlife, period. The sea was established roughly at the turn of the century, and in the 1950s, it became known as a resort town. Think of it as a Southern California version of Lake Tahoe. So you've got Palm Springs, that's probably an hour away. And after you're done in the desert proper, go to the Salton Sea for some exciting time in the water. Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, the Beach Boys, a whole host, cadre of celebrities used to frequent the numerous resorts and restaurants that littered the Bombay Beach oceanfront properties up until the salinity did the community in. 97% of the fish which lived in the Salton Sea died off, and then there was a huge epidemic of deaths within different species of pelicans, because the pelicans would come and eat the dead fish who had died because they were living in water made up of toxic salt, basically. And so pretty quickly, the formerly bustling resort community gave way to what is now a ghost town. It's a pretty incredible place to visit. When I traveled to the area, a resident informed me that she had purchased property on Bombay Beach for $14,000, and I passed by a bunch of trailers, one of which had a profanity-laden welcome mat in front of it. And then, of course, there were the dune buggies. Right out of Mad Max, people were legitimately riding dune buggies around the Salton Sea as though we were living in a post-apocalyptic reality. I would urge anyone interested in learning a bit more about the Salton Sea to watch the Visiting with Huell Hauser episode on the area. You will not regret it. Anthony Bourdain also toured the area in an episode of No Reservations, eating at one of the only two places where you can get a meal, the Ski Inn. The nearest gas station is 20 miles away, hospital roughly 40 miles, and the people who reside along the Salton Sea by and large, do not want to be found. And that is part of what makes the area so damned fascinating to anybody interested in this modern ruins concept to begin with. So if you find Pompeii fascinating, there's no reason why you shouldn't absolutely love traveling to the Salton Sea. There's a really odd Val Kilmer movie from the early 2000s called The Salton Sea, where a number of characters live at Bombay Beach, characters / methamphetamine addicts. Vincent D'Onofrio plays a drug dealer named Pooh Bear who's done so much cocaine that he no longer has a nose. Anyway, that's the Salton Sea for you. And with that, want to thank you for listening to another episode of Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast. inviting you to rate and review the podcast on Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. The reviews and ratings have an outsized effect on a podcast. They help us move up the chart. They expose us to more listeners, kind of the lifeblood for us here at Living in the Sprawl. You can correspond with us by writing to the email address, which is livinginthesprawlpodcast@gmail.com. Our Instagram handle is Living in the Sprawl Podcast, and we want to thank everyone for their continued support, interest, and enthusiasm for what we do here. Signing off on behalf of my lovely and talented producer / fiance, Lisa Lowe. My name is Jon Steinberg, your humble correspondent and host, and we wish you a phenomenal time in your adventuring. And until next time, we wish you the best from Living in the Sprawl, Southern California's most adventurous podcast.